And joining us now, we're going to have Austin Petersen. He was the guy who was running for Senate up in Missouri. Remember that, Garland?
Yep.
Sort of libertarian-leaning Republican. I want to talk to him about some of the stuff that's going on. But, you mentioned something right before the break, how the Macron government and the May government are both in a lot of trouble now for different reasons. But Macron and May could both be out of a job it's possible.
And Merkel's going to be gone.
Yeah, but it's
voluntarily, kind of.
It's a long goodbye with her.
Yeah.
But May and Macron
pretty much forced out.
It wouldn't shock me by the way, it wouldn't shock me if they're still in there.
Right.
But they could be gone in 2 weeks. Do you know what I think the solution is, obviously, judging by history, is England and France. Garland, I'm an out-of-the-box thinker. They need to be annexed by Russia. And here's why I'm saying that. You notice in Crimea, after the Russians came in, that Crimea is doing much better than it was.
Yep.
And it's certainly doing much better than Kiev, Ukraine. So what I'm saying is, what could go wrong? I'm just suggesting this. I don't know if this is going to go over well with anybody, but
we'll check. We'll call over to the Atlantic Council and run that up the flagpole, see if anybody salutes.
Hey, we got Austin Petersen joining us right now. Hey, Austin, how you doing this morning?
Good morning from Kansas City, Garland and Lee. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, no, so you know what? I wanted to talk to you. We want to talk to you about some of the headline stuff that's going on, the Trump shutdown meeting and everything else. But one thing I wanted to talk to you about is we talk a lot about populism on this show. And we got a guest coming up next hour, Garland. Nick Braun is going to be joining us. And we're going to talk with Nick. He's a guy on the left. And Austin, you're a guy on what would you
libertarian, I'd say, right?
Libertarian right. Is that broadly correct? How would you characterize yourself?
Yeah, philosophically libertarian, a member of the Republican Party. I believe in economic freedom, personal liberty. And, it's what's amazing today is that you're talking about populism is that, we sort of were on the verge of what people were calling a libertarian moment a few years ago.
Yep.
And that seems to have faded into the background, as the Tea Party has receded as well. And we've focused more on this Trump movement, which populism we should define. Populism is anti-elitism.
Exactly.
I agree.
Exactly right.
Yep.
That's what I've always said. I think that's very important for people to understand. And that does not necessitate a left or right perspective. You can be anti-elitist and on the left or on the right. And I'm with you. I'm on the right. I think leftist populism has been problematic. But I'm not so stuck in an ideology that I don't acknowledge that populism is ideology neutral to some extent. What's your take, Austin?
Yeah, there's kind of like a horseshoe theory, right? So very frequently you will find that there may be two senators on Capitol Hill who agree on something, and then every other senator disagrees with them. So Rand Paul and Bernie Sanders could not be more different in many things, but yet they both came together to say it should be legal for American citizens to purchase drugs from Canada, right? Nobody agreed with them. They stood alone.
Yep.
So why is it the Democratic Socialists and the Libertarian Republican agreed on that one? That's because on that one, they have a populist bias. They have an anti-elitist bias. Because the elitist bias in this situation is that the prescription drug companies and the government know what's better for us than we know what's good for ourselves. So they don't want to allow us to purchase these drugs from Canada. But when you're talking about left-wing populism versus right-wing populism, in my opinion, right-wing populism has surged recently as a response to left-wing populism. Right? The reason why Donald Trump got elected is because we had a push of left-wing populism, which was tearing the Democratic Party apart. The Democratic Party, the base, the left-wing populists, didn't like Hillary Clinton enough to go to the polls for her. They may have done so if it had been Bernie Sanders. But the populist right candidate won, and the whole world is being swept up in populist movements. That's what we see in Europe, and many of these are responses. For example, the Proud Boys. Many of you know Gavin McInnes.
Yeah, and we're trying to get Gavin on. I would love to get Gavin on because he's been effectively deplatformed at this point. And I don't think he deserves it. But whether I think he deserves it or not, I don't like that process that's going on. I don't like the suppression of free speech.
Completely agree. But the Proud Boys were a response, to a degree, to Antifa, right? The left-wing street gangs, the populist left, which had sprung up over the last several years, the Proud Boys were a response to that. So we have this sort of escalation of populist conflict that's growing here in the United States. And, we've actually never truly had a successful populist movement in the United States until now. We've had many populist movements. We had the Know-Nothings during Abraham Lincoln's period, right? These were the anti-immigration people of their time, and they did have some political power, but they never had the kind of political power that the populist movement in the United States has right now. Some of it fueled by the remnants of the Tea Party, but most of it fueled by a reaction to the left and what's happening on the left. So I see some danger in this, though, guys, because just because something is anti-elite doesn't mean it's libertarian or conservative or right-wing, because very frequently what happens is that these populist movements go off the rails, and you will have the extremists of the debate. So, for example, we had Charlottesville, if you all remember. That was an example of this populism going off the rails, and it needed to be reined in because many of these people were going into the realm of conspiracy theory, into anti-Semitism. And it's not that, and it's going to get a lot of publicity when it happens on the right. It's not going to get a lot of publicity when Linda Sarsour and the others spew their anti-Semitic conspiracy theories on the left. So there's an unbridled, unchecked populism from the left, and the rights movement very much has been a reaction to that. So I'm not sure where this goes, but as for me and my house, we will serve the cause of liberty.
Well, one thing I think when you talk about populism, particularly when you talk about Antifa, you're talking about, for the most part, an anarchist movement, which I can't put anarchy in they've got their own category, in my opinion, and that is, they're completely, they're opposed to government. It's not really a populism. They don't want.
But there's a distinction between the left anarchist, which is what Antifa is, and the libertarian anarchist or minarchist. Without getting full libertarian nerdy,
right?
Austin, you know what I'm talking about.
But my point, I think, is, and this has always been my point on the Antifas and the Proud Boys, I never want to get caught up where the discussion is about a tiny sliver of extremist, to me. And I think there is a lot going on. When I look at France, what's going on right now, and I've been watching a lot, reading a lot about it, really looking in the last several days. And what I see is a lot of people in the streets who are angry and they're anti-elitist, but they're all over the place ideologically. Yeah, there's a few extremists running around here, but overall, there are people who are angry at their government, angry at elitism, who are walking around, showing it. The other thing that's interesting, I think, about France, and I'd like to get you to comment on that about France, is that Macron, there are no elitists in the world who can dismiss the working class like the French elitists. Go back to Marie Antoinette. They'll wait until they're outside the castle ready to throw them, put their heads in the guillotine, and they'll still be showing disdain for the working people. They are the ultimate elitist in France, and Macron is, keeping up a long tradition of that level of elitism. But what do you think about France, the Yellow Vest movement, and all the people being in the street there, Austin?
Yeah, I posted a really funny meme. I don't know if you guys play video games, but it was from Super Mario Brothers. Princess Peach was being led up to the gallows by the Toad and the Mushroom Kingdoms, and it said, "No more princesses, no more castles," and they were going to behead Princess Peach. The problem, of course, with populism is that sometimes it can go off the rails. It can be a double-edged sword. The problem, of course, is you'll get some good ideas from the populist movements, but then you'll get some very bad ideas as well. So, for example, in France, you have the Yellow Vest movement, and they have a list of demands. Some of these demands seem reasonable. Some of these demands are the kinds of things that I agree with. So here, let me list here about 4 or 5 what they've got on this list. 1 is banning lobbies. 2, they want smaller banks. 3, they want to ban GMOs and glyphosates and monocultures. They're anti-foreign interventionism. They're for political diversity in the media, and also they want Frexit, right? They want to follow Britain, and they want to exit the European Union. Now, 3 or 4 of those things I really like, and I'd like to see them implemented.
Yep.
A few of the other things, they're not very libertarian, and the problem is that, what happens is that you get kind of this Occupy Wall Street mentality with some of these protesters, where they're saying, we want more government, in a sense. They're protesting the government to demand more government. And I sort of remember pictures from the Occupy Wall Street days when they were getting pepper sprayed in the face, and people were posting memes that said, "Wanted more government, got more government," in the face. So the problem, of course, is that there's an anti-libertarian instinct within many of these populist movements that if you did give them control or give them power, I think it would go off the rails. Not every idea, just because it comes from the elites, is a bad idea. As a matter of fact, guys, how frequently do you find yourself with coming to an opinion about something that you believe is factually backed, but you realize that the majority of the people in your country or in your electorate don't agree with you and are wrong? But there are so many times this is why we don't have an unchecked democracy in the United States. We have checks on democracy here, like things like the Electoral College in the United States, because our founding fathers knew that unchecked democracy could lead to the gulags. We don't want that in the United States. You have to have a check on that, because while I don't think that the elites in the United States or even the elites in France have the best interests of the people in mind, that doesn't mean that all of their ideas are bad. It's unfortunate because I think the biggest problem that we suffer from in the human race is what we call bifurcated thinking, right? If you're not this, you're not that, right? It's black or it's white. This is how we get a two-party system, because everybody who doesn't agree with you is your enemy and everybody who agrees with you is your friend. But that's quite often not the case, right? We sort of lost the days of the warrior philosophers or the philosopher kings, and we've replaced it with the concept that everybody is an expert because everybody knows how to use Google, so everybody knows the true answer to this. But yet, in the end, what's happening, unfortunately, is that we're all confirming our biases. Like the American libertarians, we all celebrated for about 2 days the Yellow Vest protests because they were protesting against the tax. Of course, they don't want the gas tax on themselves. They want to put it on the quote-unquote rich people, right? But only the elitist conservative economists in the United States know that you can't squeeze any more tax money. You could tax every single penny from all the rich, and you still wouldn't pay off the tax.
But Austin, let me ask you this, because I've been looking into this, and what I see is something a little different, where the Yellow Vest movement, their issue was this, that the government recently passed massive tax cuts for the rich. Massive tax cuts for the rich, right? And then a few months later, they passed this gigantic fuel tax that hurts the working class people. So it's not, oh, well, hey, we want you to tax the rich more. It was a matter of, well, this ain't fair. You know, for the average person, you tax the crap out of us, and then you take it. I think they're saying they wanted a fair shot, and I don't think that's unreasonable.
Let me just say this too. First off, Austin, I think you've done a absolutely brilliant job of summing up the right populist position and pointing out some of the dangers of populism, which again is, to me, it's ideologically neutral, and you have to recognize that. Here's what I think. I think we're in a post, and I'm going to ask you the same question that I'm going to ask Nick Brana next hour. Okay? I think we're in a new era now because 10 years ago, the iPhone was introduced. And since then, the means of production for real estate, for research and communications have been leveled. It used to be only very few people had access to, printing presses or TV antennas or radio stations or whatever. Now everybody has access to that and everybody can research it. And this is a very new phenomenon that there's no way humanity in 10 years their brains haven't been set up to research well. So now, thousands of years of only elites having access to that kind of knowledge and communications technology, suddenly everybody's got it, and nobody knows quite what to do with it yet. So let me ask you the same question I'm going to ask Nick. I think the solution here is people on the left and right starting to discuss the issues of populism and agreeing on some basic principles, such as violence is bad. Such as, for instance, violence is bad. And I don't care whether it comes from the black bloc or whoever it comes, or Nazis or whatever. And that speech is good. And that speech, civil speech, and that, by the way, all civil speech means to me is nonviolent speech. It doesn't mean don't argue.
Right.
It means that's fine, argue. Let's get it on. Let's talk about these things. But if the left and right start talking, as they started to talk a little bit during the Occupy Wall Street movement and the birth of the Tea Party, a few people were going, hey, wait a minute. I notice we're both concerned about banks that are out of control. Do you think I'm going to ask the same question to Nick Brana later on the left. do you think it's possible? Do you see some signs of optimism that the left and right are going to start talking?
I'm a pretty optimistic person, but I have to answer in the negative on this one. And the reason why is because I used to hang with the anarchists, the right-wing anarchists in New York City. There's an old tradition of anarcho-capitalists coming out of New York City in the Murray Rothbard tradition.
Yep.
And quite frequently, we would go down to Occupy Wall Street in our free time, and we would spend time with the democratic socialists and the anarchists of the left. And we did agree on certain things. One of the major things that the left-wing anarchists and the right-wing anarchists agreed on is the concept of breaking up the Federal Reserve System here in the United States.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Yeah, we see this as an oppressive institution that determines how much your money is worth at any given time. That a central bank can tell you how much money you can make on your money market accounts. Right? Why can't we have floating interest rates? Why can't banks compete? Right, we've essentially eliminated one of the basic necessities of capitalism and determining the money supply and allowing that to float on the free market. Now, that's a little wonky, but the fact of the matter is there are some major issues that left and right agree on. But at the end of the day, the problem is that there's always going to be 4 or 5 people who want to poison the well. There was always somebody there who wanted to poison the well by saying, well, yes, but at the end of the day, the anarchists don't want to destroy the government and then replace it with our ideal communist utopia, and then it devolves. But on the senatorial level, on the congressional level, I do see some people working together. There are some Democrats that I look at with respect. People like who's the representative from Hawaii?
Tulsi Gabbard.
Tulsi Gabbard.
I'm a big fan of Tulsi Gabbard.
I am as well, and I disagree with her on quite a few things, but I agree with her on foreign interventionism. I agree with her on foreign policy, and she's an expert on these issues.
You sound like me on Rand Paul, and I'm like, I disagree. You know, you're a libertarian. I'm on the left. I don't agree with you guys on economic policy. But here's what I've said. As far as I'm concerned, we can't get anywhere as a country until we get the heck out of these foreign wars and do something about, the military budget. And if Rand Paul's running against the usual Democratic schmuck who's going to continue, I'd probably vote for Rand Paul just for a possibility to get out of the wars.
Amen. But here's the thing. The problem is right now is that the essential items, the things that we need to focus on, we are so easily distracted by so many, cat videos on Facebook or the Internet. So while you were talking about the invention of the Gutenberg publishing machine, right, the Gutenberg Bible, the problem with this technology is that we have a higher noise-to-signal ratio than we have ever had. One of the big problems with these tech companies, and that we've had these hearings with like Facebook and CEO, is that we can't get Facebook or Google to answer the question of whether or not they are a publisher or whether or not they are a common carrier. Now, Facebook is acting like a publisher in some ways. They are deciding who can or can't be heard on their platform. And we believe that Google is doing the same thing, although we couldn't determine that from the testimony yesterday that we heard from Google's CEO. But here's the thing, guys.
Wait, hey, Austin, we are out of time. We got to get you back on again soon. I'm really serious.
Me, guys.
This was an absolutely brilliant. You did a great job, I think, of summing it up. Yep. And Garland, I think this is an important discussion. I'm going to ask the same question I asked Austin of Nick Brana next, because I am optimistic.
That's why this show is important, buddy.
That people on the left and right can start talking and actually put aside some of these ideological differences.
They did it in Italy.
Yeah, that's right.